Hi, my name is Jim Alkon. I'm the editorial director of BookTrib. My guest today on BookTrib TV is Terry Hayes, writer, film producer, and best-selling author. And we're here to discuss Terry's long-awaited and highly anticipated new thriller, The Year of the Locust, which I think you can see up in the corner of our screen there. Welcome, Terry. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you very much for having me on the program.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I know that you're based in Lisbon right now, so we're kind of across worlds, but we're thrilled to have you. And I should tell you, I just want to let you know personally and get this out of the way. My friends know I've been gushing since I told them, we're having this interview, because they know, and I have to tell you this, Terry, and I want everyone who's listening to know too. I Am Pilgrim really is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh,
and
thank you.
And I know you're probably thinking, oh, you say that to all the authors you interview. Well, ask my friends. I really don't. It really was a fascinating book. And we're in a business where people will ask me for recommendations constantly. And over the last 10 years, whenever they say, hey, you have any good books? I'll say, well, we've had the conversation about I Am Pilgrim, haven't we? If we haven't, that should be your next book. and just one more interesting anecdote. I Am Pilgrim was introduced to me. The person who told me about you and this book was a sweet 95-year-old woman, the mother of a dear friend of mine. So I'm sure when someone asks you what your target market or your target audience for your book is, I'm sure it's all, elderly women over 95 years old, right?
Yeah, very small segment of the market, unfortunately. But I mean, I Am Pilgrim's a pretty harrowing book. There's a very confronting murder at the beginning, and then some bad guy removes somebody's eyes. There's waterboarding. There's various methods of torture.
You're reminding me why I loved it. I'm so sorry. You're reminding me of everything I liked about it. But you're right. A 95-year-old woman.
I hope she survived.
Yeah.
Did she survive it, Jim? Is she still with us?
Unfortunately, she's not still with us. She lived past 100, but
wow.
She's gone. In fact, she gave me her copy, which was the large type version. Large type, because that's what she read. Yeah. That didn't work for me. I had to go get another copy. Let me just. I wanted to jump into The Year of the Locust. I want to read just a quick sentence. And this is spoken by the narrator. It's a spy known as Kane. That's how he's referred to. And I think this captures the essence of the spy game, and also is a perfect example of why I really love your writing. Okay, this is the beginning, near the beginning of The Year of the Locust. He says, I was being asked to find a white male of indeterminate height and nationality, with a name we didn't know, in a place we couldn't identify, wearing a face we had never seen, and leaving fingerprints that weren't his own. That's kind of the essence of what it's all about, right, Terry?
Yeah. The harder you make the task, the more you elevate the hero. The state that quite a few people are working within the genre that I work in, they don't make the task quite hard enough. So the hero never has to surpass his own expectations. I think throughout so much of Locust that Kane does not feel he's capable of doing what is necessary. I mean, he goes into Iran to find a man that has got very critical information. I don't think in his heart he fully expects to return. He's not capable of so much that he has to do. But I guess, Jim, in a way, that's the story of us all, isn't it? You have to, your ambition has to be greater than your reach. And then we see what we're really made of. And, and so Kane does. Kane.
And certainly in the profession that Kane is in, I mean, it seems like every minute, every assignment, he's stretching the envelope. And I think he understands, as you just said, that the consequences of failing, are not pleasant.
No, they're catastrophic for him and the world.
Right.
So So yeah, he pushes out there. It's my job, you know. I mean, it's lovely of you to say that things are well written. I try hard. I never quite achieve my own ambitions, but I see myself as a storyteller, and I try to engage the reader on every paragraph, every page. And one of the tricks of doing that is to put your lead character into situations that seem almost impossible to survive or escape from.
No, I think that's well said, and that, you know, that permeates throughout the entire book. Let me ask you a question, and you know, without giving away any classified information, so you're going to have to kill me after you answer it. You know, I just want to know, how do you know so much about spies and terrorism, the CIA, all the clandestine activities and operations that you write about? Where does that all come from? Again, don't tell me anything where you'll have to kill me.
No. When I've got 4 children, the oldest is 22, the youngest is 16. But when they were quite a bit younger, they asked a very similar question. So of course I told them I was a spy, and for about 4 or 5 hours, I got a reasonable amount of respect. Before, you know, it's like when your kids start discussing Santa Claus, you know, they pool their collective information and they work out that things may not be quite as they are being told, and they did that with me. So no, I cannot attest to being a spy, but many years ago, I was appointed a foreign correspondent to go to New York for a group of Australian newspapers, a very prestigious group of Australian newspapers. If you think the down under version of the New York Times, you're getting close. And I think to this day, I am the youngest foreign correspondent ever appointed by a newspaper group in that country, and shows what little they knew, I might add. But anyway, they had faith in me, and they sent me over there. And one of the stories I had to do, or was asked to do by the managing editor, was to look at the Australian involvement in the Vietnam War. How did we get into it? Why did we do it? And why was it such a disaster? And he said to me, you want to know where to start? Pull on the CIA thread. They were up to their, you know, armpits in co-opting Australia into that war. Of course, our politicians went along with it. You know, politicians always go along with things. So anyway, so I started to look at this, and I interviewed a guy called Victor Marchetti, one of the bravest men I've ever had the privilege of meeting. And he'd written a book called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. He was the executive assistant to the director of the CIA, and he felt the CIA was going totally in the wrong direction. So I interviewed him, and he told me a lot of stuff. I wrote the story, 10,000 words, and nearly lost my job because the chairman of the newspaper company had a very different view of how we got into Vietnam and why we were there. And, you know, he was of the view that we were going to stop the communist hordes from coming down, sweeping down, invading Australia. Why they would want Australia was nobody could ever tell me that. But anyway, I managed to survive, but it gave me a lifelong interest in that nexus between politics, the intelligence communities, and tragic events. I'm not saying for a minute that the soldiers that went there were in any way wrong. I mean, neither the Australians, the Americans, or anybody else that was there, but they were the victims, as usual, of some, you know, what Henry Kissinger called the realpolitik of the world. And so I got very interested in that. And I've always maintained the interest. And then, thankfully, Jim, the internet came along. And if you've been an investigative reporter, which I was for many years, you know how to find things. You know what to follow and what not to. And if you keep dig, you can find some remarkable things on the internet, and then you start to find the people to talk to. And, you know, in any intelligence organization, it's not a monolithic structure where everybody thinks we're going in the right direction. It's more than likely a whole lot of disparate people with different opinions about what direction we should be heading in and where we're going. So you can talk to lots of different people. So yeah, I was a reporter at heart, and I became a screenwriter and then a novelist.
And I think just the level of research, I mean, you know, I Am Pilgrim is about 600 pages. The Year of the Locust is about 800. And I only say that because there are 1,400 pages is chock full of detail and subtleties that you know, that I asked the question because it seems like this has to be more than just a writer doing research. You know, I mean,
Well, I do all my own research.
Yeah.
Some writers employ people, but I think what you're looking for, Jim, is those very unique details.
Yeah.
If we were to take Locust, there's a sequence in Locust that is set in a place called Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan. And not many people know this, but I do. And that is that Baku was once the wealthiest city in the world. There was nowhere came close. The Rockefellers were there, the Rothschilds, everybody of those great storied moneyed names from Europe and America were there. Why? Because whale oil had once lit the world. That was how the whales got decimated. And so whale oil was what wealthy people used to light their homes. And then, thank God for the whales. Yeah, I mean, this was a great salvation for the ecology of the world. Somebody discovered that if you could refine oil into kerosene, and kerosene was a vastly better product than whale oil. Well, there was one place in the world where you didn't even have to drill. It pulled out of the ground, and that was near Baku in Azerbaijan. So they all went there and built these incredible mansions. I think it says in the book, you know, they were to an architectural style of Baghdad via Paris. They were remarkable places. So that still exists to some extent. Of course, you know, all the wildcatters arrived. People started to drill. The great oil fields of Texas were discovered. Those of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. The world changed. Baku got left behind. The Soviets came. But there are still places where that oil bubbles out from underground to the surface. And one of those are the fissures that run under the Caspian Sea. If lightning strikes, the sea catches on fire. And that's a remarkable thing, the fire surf of Baku. Well,
but even this little nugget that you're sharing, it all you had to do the research. You had to come up with this kind of information in order to put it all together, because I don't think, you know, for the 1,400 words in 2 books, you don't waste words. You know, they're all introduced for a reason. There's going to be something to do with the plot that makes this happen. Let me ask you a question, Terry, more of a mechanical question. You know, I know fans of I Am Pilgrim for years, you know, would check on all the book websites, you know, and they'd see this Year of the Locust. Oh, okay, there's something coming out. It was supposed to come out maybe 8 years ago or 7 years ago. Whatever the case, it took 10 years, and finally, I know when I got the notice from your publicity people, I thought, wow, look at this! It's really coming out after all this time. So the $1 million question: why did it take you 10 years to finally come up with a second book?
Yeah, good question. A lot of people ask me that. Generally, I just say I'm slow, mentally slow at typing. But that's not entirely the truth. The truth is much more complicated. Ever since I was 5 years old, I was a migrant child. I went to Australia from Britain, and Australia was a very different place then, and vastly different to a small village in England. And there were just the 4 of us, just mum, dad, me, and my brother. So I grew up without any family, just the 4 of us. And it was a very difficult time. My mother was not mentally well, and I was the youngest child, and she took great. She put a lot of weight on my shoulders, which she didn't mean to, but wasn't entirely fair. So I grew up in a fairly alien environment, very confronting environment, with a difficult home situation. So I took refuge in reading. So I read a real lot. I loved that escape from the earliest age. So I can't remember a time, Jim, when I wasn't going to be a writer. I was going to be a writer because I read a lot. And of course, when you're young, you can be anything. You can be an astronaut, you can be a brain surgeon. I'd go to the library or the local bookshop and I'd see thousands of books. And I'd think to myself, well, it can't be that hard. I mean, there's all these people doing it.
If there were so many, if so many people are doing it, what the heck? One more.
It's got to be pretty easy. So I became a writer, at the age of, 7, 8, whatever. And that got wound into my DNA. I was one of those fortunate people that I was never going to do anything different. I see this with my own kids. 2 of them know exactly what they're doing in life. The other 2 are wandering around looking for something. There's no right or wrong. I was just fortunate that I knew, but I didn't know how hard it would be, but you never do as a kid. So that became a lifelong dream, which was to write a well-received and popular novel that people around the world would enjoy. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about fame. God forbid, I'm some of the most famous people in the world, and nobody would want that. Nobody in their right mind would want that. No, it wasn't about that. It was just as a tribute, in a way, I guess, to my childhood and my heroes who were writers. So many years pass, and I go on a big adventure and become a reporter. I become a radio producer. I become a Hollywood screenwriter, and I write a novel. And it's well received, and it sells all around the world. And I'd fulfilled a childhood ambition. Now, the conventional wisdom would be that you go and buy champagne, go down the Ferrari dealership, and have a good old time. And it wasn't like that, unfortunately. It left a huge hole in my life, a huge hole. It's that Chinese proverb, be careful what you wish for. You might just get it. And I got it. And I was completely unprepared. I had no idea that this would happen, that I would be empty because I'd lived with this ambition so long. So I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to process that. And then there was one other event. I'm sorry to go on at length, but you did ask. I was 200 pages into Pilgrim, too far into a bad, but not far enough to see the end. And my brother arrived. I was living in Sydney at the time. My brother arrived at the house unannounced, told me he had cancer. He was 3 years older than me. And as I say, there are only the 4 of us. And I said, well, what do they say? He said 6 months. And he was about right. And that was a very difficult event. About 3 or 4 months later, I had that rather unpleasant duty, which I wouldn't wish on anybody, of standing in the corridor of a hospice and saying to the doctors, I don't think my father will ever come back. And I think the best thing we can do is to turn the machines off. And they agreed. 6 months after that, my mum passed away. So within the space of a year, I lost my entire family. And they were the only people that had been there when that young kid dreamed of being a writer. They never saw the book published. And that was difficult. But I didn't have time to grieve, and no time to grieve. I had to finish that book. I had 4 children of my own. I had a wife. I had responsibilities. And, I've always worked very, very hard. So I finished the book. And when it got finished, I got a phone call from the publisher in the UK. They were the first ones to publish. And he said, it's going to be huge. It is going to be huge. He said, I've seen the first week's figures. And then he finally said to me, you don't seem very happy. I said, no, of course, I'm happy. I said, but I know one thing, my life won't be the same again. Not because of fame, God forbid, but because of that emptiness, because of that sense of not having something to drive me forward every day. And then, of course, feelings of, excuse me, the feelings of my family and the loss. So I had a lot of things to deal with. I had to grieve. I had to go on my own journey, and I had to be fair to my kids. Given my own childhood, I wanted them to have the best childhood imaginable. Of course, they say it was terrible. They say it's the worst childhood ever, you know, but I did my best. So it was a very complicated time for me, and I didn't feel any necessary obligation to write another book. J.D. Salinger wrote one. Harper Lee wrote one. Plenty of people have written one good one, and a few bad ones.
But you know, that's a good point. I mean, some people just, I want to say, spit them out, and I don't say that disrespectfully. You know, they can turn them out very quickly. Other people, I've written a book, and now I'm on to something else. There's no you know, law that says I've got to write another one or this or that. Some people will write mini series. You know, so the fact that you took that length of time, obviously you had, you know, personal issues to deal with, absolutely makes sense. But I want to get into the book just a little bit. Okay.
Yes,
I want to hear about Cain. Cain is the narrator and the spy. Tell me a little bit about his disposition in life. I mean, you give him a family. He has a home life to balance with this crazy occupation he has of being a spy. Tell me about who he is and what makes him tick.
Yeah, that's interesting because Gore Vidal, you know, is a pretty good writer, quite a celebrity. He liked that fame side of things. He once said that all good drama happens within families. I know what he meant. You get a lot of stuff for nothing. You get a lot of emotional attachments for free, because people understand instantly what somebody will do for their kids or what they will do for somebody they love, or, you know, it's a very interesting dynamic, as we all know, because most of us have families. Even if they're a total screw up, we still have families. So that I found fascinating, because in Pilgrim he had nothing. I had to work from whole cloth. He had no attachments in the world whatsoever. As far as I can work out, well, there is one mention that he had sex with somebody somewhere in all those pages of Pilgrim, and it's just mentioned in passing. He's long time ago he used drugs. He doesn't drink alcohol. I mean, he's just awful. I mean, he's the most misanthropic, and if you believe all the people on Amazon, he's very misogynistic, which I don't think he is, but everybody can have their opinion about it. He's, you know, he's a very troubled and had a terrible, you know, childhood, and all of that. You know, you can speculate on where that part came from, and that. So when it came time for me to do Locust, where I decided that, well, time to get back to work, I wanted to go in a diametrically opposite direction. I couldn't stand spending any more time with somebody as emotionally detached from the world as he. So I gave Cain all of those attributes: a committed emotional relationship with a wonderful woman. I think she's just a great character. Emergency room doctor, came from a double wide in Appalachia and has struggled to make really something of her life. And she stands up to the director of the CIA in a way that, you know, it gives you goosebumps, because you think, good on you, somebody's got to talk truth to power. And he's got children in unusual circumstance, which we can't go into, and you know, so it becomes a very dynamic world. He's a denied access area spy, the toughest of the tough, not you know, in cruelty, but in being able to withstand pressure and fear and loneliness, anxiety, going into the worst places in the world. If he were working today and I was writing it, he'd be going into Gaza, no doubt of, or into Yemen. And that's his life. He meets her. He's done very well at his work. There's, there's deep-seated psychological reasons why somebody might want to do that work. And she discovers what he does as a job and thinks it'd be a good idea for him to give it up. So you get conflict. So he's a good guy. Of course, as fate would have it, in a moment of weakness, I've signed the contract to write Pilgrim 2. So my happy families of Cain and Rebecca now disappearing in the rearview mirror, and coming up at 100 miles an hour towards me is this misanthropic loner traveling through the world without any emotional attachment, Scott Murdoch from I Am Pilgrim. So now I've got to make friends with him again. And I'm in the process of doing that as we speak.
Great. I want to talk about, and one thing when I tell my friends, the few that haven't read, one of your books about the book, I say, this guy, Terry Hayes, he's the master of the cliffhanger. And I think that's what attracted me to the work, the writing style. And I think, I don't remember the exact scene in I Am Pilgrim. I think, the main character was, I don't know if he was like on the edge of a cliff or something, trying to save his life in some circumstance. And he notices a little thread from a pair of khaki pants, and just very, if you remember the scene, he wrote it, and he'll say something like, I didn't think of it then, but in retrospect, I should have paid more attention to that little thread of khaki pants. And again, that sucks the reader in, because you say, all right, this is going to come back and mean something later, and I just think that style is so terrific.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing to do. And that's not to say you have to be intelligent to do it. I'm not arguing that. But it is complicated, because you're always laying pipe that doesn't get connected until sometimes hundreds of pages later. And you've got to try to keep all of this rubbish, I could use another word, but all of this stuff in your head. And you've got to think,
I've got to come back to that. I can't let that go.
I've set up. What am I going to do? How am I going to pay that off?
Right.
And that's but that's unfortunate, Jim. My mind sort of works like that. My kids say to me, don't ever ask him about the weather. Do not ask him if we should put a sweater on, because he'll start with the Big Bang Theory. We'll go back to the Big Bang Theory, the formation of the universe, in order that we understand where weather comes from. And all we want to know is it cold? But I like the connections, I've always liked that. And that's so unfortunate. It's got nothing to do with intelligence or ability or talent or any of those things. Some people's minds work like that, I guess, and some people are much more literal in one step after another. But for better or for worse, that's not me.
Well, let's take, I want to get into the Year of the Locust, and I want to ask you to read a brief passage, but I want to set it up. The first line, the first line of the Year of the Locust is I once went to kill a man. I once went to kill a man. Okay, so you introduce this, and by the way, what we're going to read is won't give anything away. The book's 800 pages. This is all in the first 20. But what happens is basically the narrator, Cain, is in charge with going to find a traitor. This is a traitor that's given away some of the assets, and they've reached kind of not a pretty picture. But here he's got to track this guy down across the world, and he finally, Magus is the name of the guy he's tracking down. So Terry, if you could just read the little passage just as Cain is getting to the point of going face to face with Magus, I think that's really a fascinating little segment. So
I'm happy to read it. I hope it's well written. My God, if it's not, I'm going to be shattered. Anyway, here we go. Instead, I followed the Marcus's trail, and one of the insignificant items that he had left on the table at the Espinasse Hotel in Tehran led me to the island in the Aegean. I knew that he lived alone, with the noon sun warming my back, red bougainvillea tumbling over the villa's walls, and a black Sig Sauer 9mm in hand. I entered via a locked basement door, made my way through the silent house, and found him in the kitchen cooking pasta over a gas hob, quietly singing an Italian love song to himself. He wasn't German at all, as it turned out. He faltered mid-note, sensing my presence, and turned towards the dining room. We faced each other across 30 feet of balmy Mediterranean air, and then, without hesitating, he took half a step, momentarily shielding his left hand from view. In one movement, I slid the safety off and tightened my finger against the trigger. I got no further. In the split second between my eye seeing and my hand reacting, he pulled off an extraordinary piece of tradecraft which hurled me, ears ringing, half deafened, backwards across the room and gave him 20 seconds to open fire with the pistol he had somehow produced and escape into the garden. Once again, he was on the run, doing what he was best at, disappearing. But in the fullness of time, the real significance of those hours on the island had nothing to do with whether I had found him or if the CIA had managed to take its revenge. No, its importance was entirely different. Quite by accident, the Marcus had taught me a brilliant trick, a remarkable piece of tradecraft that ended up saving my life.
You know, so
it wasn't too bad.
The beauty of that passage, I think, is I think the reader's thinking, okay, I've come face to face with him. It's the beginning of the book. I'm going to kill this guy. And somehow Cain, it almost sounds like he's not even disappointed that Magus got away. You know, it's more about what a move. Oh my goodness, I'm a spy. This guy's a spy. He just taught me something. And as it turned out, you're going to explain a little later, that move is going to save Cain's life later on. So there's the cliffhanger again. I mean,
that's absolutely true, and it's very insightful of you to see that Cain was not devastated by failing to kill him, because Cain had said earlier that if it's revenge you're looking for, and the CIA are looking for revenge, then dig two graves, yours, his and yours, and. You know, the thing with the intelligence agents is the really good ones. They're not in the business of justice. They're not in the business of punishment. They're in the business of finding information, completing their mission, and adding to that store of intelligence that their country or their community needs in order to avert some form of disaster. That's Cain. He's not there as, you know, judge, jury, and executioner. He's there, and he feels that going to that island in the Aegean he's been ordered to do it, and he does the best he can. But in his heart, he feels that this, and he says to the director of the CIA, I think we'd be much better, you know, we'd be much better people if we were looking at the next threat instead of trying to worry about the last disaster. And
well, you know, it's interesting, Terry, any position or role that I've ever had in my life, no matter where I am in my career, I'm always thinking, hey, if I can learn something while I'm doing this, I mean, obviously I want to be able to give something, but I also want to take and learn from the other people I work with. It's almost like with Cain, this is like an on-the-job learning experience. Okay, you know, maybe I failed the test, but I learned something that's going to allow me to pass the next one, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why he's so good.
Yeah,
he's open. He does not feel that he knows it all. How could he? He's always been projected into circumstances that very few people have ever been in. And he's always open to ingenuity, new ideas, learning, and using whatever resources he has, both mental, you know, both intellectual, physical, to try to stay alive, complete the mission.
No, that's absolutely. So let me ask you, let me just twist it a little bit now. What, you know, I'm just curious, who have your major literary influencers been? People and inspirations, people who have meant a lot to you as you've, you know, progressed through your career.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that there are writers, which we both respect, who manage to turn out a a book every year or every 18 months or whatever. And I read a very interesting Washington Post profile of a writer called Dean Kuntz, and he's obviously extremely successful. And God bless him. I wish every writer was successful. He's written 109 books. Now that's a lot of books, and he's not that old. So he's written 109 books, and I have nothing but unalloyed admiration for that. I really do. On the other hand, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote 2 books, the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit. So all of us, whether you're a writer, but I think it's true of life in general, we have a decision to make. What path do we want to follow? Well, I was a young kid and I like big epic stories. And I ended up following a path of telling big epic stories. Mr. Kuntz obviously read differently and followed a different path. So, my influences were Tolkien, James Clavell, Shogun, which I think was a massive, epic, astonishing achievement. The Japanese say it's completely inaccurate. Who cares? It was a great story, well told. The person that changed all of my life was Tolstoy with Anna Karenina, because I'd read a lot of commercial fiction. I'd also read a lot of really quality literature, a lot. And what I realized when I read Tolstoy was that you could have all the elements of commercial literature, that page turning, unable to stop reading, that element, as well as high literary quality. And to this day, that's the book I admire most, because it is epic. It captures a period of Russian history, which you don't need to read any history book. I don't know whether Tolstoy was correct or not, but he got me to believe it. So that really changed me. And then, as I became older, I guess, and more interested in a certain genre, Jean le Carré, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, early le Carré works were really quite astonishing, because they too were written by a man that could really write and could also really tell a story. So, and then of course there was Hemingway and, all the usual suspects.
I've heard of some of those people.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. The trouble is, Jim, the real trouble is this. They rack my book in the bookstores, and you can take a few steps down, because Hayes, you can take a few steps down and there's that damn Hemingway. And the reading member of the public who's gone into that bookstore looks at my book and thinks, oh, yeah, that sort of looks interesting. And then their eye wanders and they see, Mr. Hemingway. And they take Hemingway. So I've got this theory that 30 years after publication, you should be removed from all the shelves and give new people a chance. But I don't think that's going to happen. So
you're making me think, because I always wondered about people that use pen names. But now there's some logic to it, depending on alphabetically where you're going to sit, on the bookshelves and who you're going to be competing next to,
That's right. I should have written under the name Aaron Aardvark. I've been the first of the age,
Right. You ended up, I used to sit in the corner of all my classes, Alkon, they'd always sit us alphabetically, so I always had that corner view. Let me ask you, talking about all these authors and everything, not that you've necessarily had dialogue with them, but what's the best piece of advice about writing books that you've ever gotten?
About writing, yeah.
About writing.
Well, you got to find the conflict, either within the person or within their relationships. If you haven't got any conflict, you haven't got a story. You might have beautiful writing. You might have wonderful character studies. You might have terrific descriptions of Venice at sunset. You might have many things, but if you haven't got conflict, nothing's being revealed. I mean, the most interesting to me, the most interesting event of conflict is a boxing ring. Neither man can leave, or woman now, but neither person can leave. There is generally only one victor, and you see the combatants stripped bare. You see who's got the courage and who hasn't. When Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali wanted to throw the towel in. They'd gone 14 rounds. He could barely stand, and he took the mouth guard out, and he was done. And Angelo Dundee said no, refused to let him quit, because he'd seen in Frazier's corner that they were getting the towel ready, and they threw the towel in. Now that's conflict. That's the story.
That's
sorry.
Okay, the thriller in Manila, right?
Yeah, and that's what you're looking for.
Right.
Look, Muhammad Ali at the very top of his, power as a boxer. And I'm no fan of boxing, don't get me wrong, but at the very top, if he went into the ring against Terry, well, wouldn't be much of a match, would it? I mean, but you put him in the ring against Frazier or any other great fighter, and that's worth watching. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the conflict. You're looking for them to be in a confined area where nobody can give up. They have to take it in. And you want to see their characters revealed. You want to see, look, do you want to watch Sonny Liston take a dive in the second? No, thanks. No, but you learned a lot about a man's character. You learned a lot. So I'm just using it as an analogy. I'm not suggesting I'm going to go and write a boxing story. I don't know anything about it, but that's what I'm looking for all the time. In Locust, I'm looking for Kane and this guy called Kaczynski to be locked in a conflict that neither one can escape except when somebody dies. And I hope that you see in that process things revealed about their character. I hope. That's up to the readers to decide.
We're just about out of time, but I want to ask one more question. And this is, I read this in another interview where you said, I hope you remember saying this, the purpose of life is not to be happy. The purpose of life is not to be happy. And as it turns out, as I read the interview, the person you were talking to at the time and the person you said that to was the woman who one day would become your wife. So I'm curious, what did you mean by that? The purpose of life is not to be happy. And what is the purpose of life, according to Terry Hayes?
Well, yes, I said it to my wife. She's never let me forget it. It was on one of our first dates. We were sitting in the car. I was dropping her off at home. And she'd said to me something about, the quest for happiness. I looked in complete shock and said, but that's not the purpose of life. The purpose of life, I think, is to pay the rent for your space on earth. I'm trying to pay my rent. And not to the landlord, but to whatever divine providence gave me in allowing me to live. All of us are completely unique. We all have something to contribute. And I was given, in my madness, I thought I was given some degree of talent. And I thought that the purpose of life was to use it, to try to achieve, to have ambition. And they say there are two types of people in the world: those that want to be famous and those who want their work to be famous. Well, I'm in the latter group. I have no interest in getting nice tables in fancy restaurants in LA. No, I would like my work to be well known. I felt that I had some of the ability that might allow me to do it. And I figured if I didn't do it, I wasn't paying my rent. I said the same to my kids. I'm not here to take. It's John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. and
Well,
whether it's the country or the family. So we had a long discussion, and she still married me. So, you know, she's crazy.
well, I'll tell you, Terry, I mean, we're just about out of time, but somehow in your looking to quote unquote pay the rent, you have created and written two magnificent novels. I Am Pilgrim, again, it's been a thrill talking with you. It's one of my favorite books of all time. That means an awful lot to me. And The Year of the Locust is another wonderful book, and I highly recommend it to our audience. It's the kind of book you're going to stay up at night reading, but I assure you, you will not finish it in one night. It's just too long. But that's the joy of it. You're not going to finish it right away. So again, thank you so much, Terry, for the time. We appreciate this. These insights have been fascinating. Again, I'm Jim Alkon, and we will see you all the next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.